facial expressions to decode constantly shifting social dynamics. It eliminates the noise of a medieval town, the shouting, hammering, bells, animals and people, always the people, wanting things, expecting things, communicating in ways that are exhausting to decode. Anchoritic life removes all of that. It replaces chaos with order and replaces the terrifying openness of the world with 3 windows, a set of walls, and a schedule that never ever changes. The Ancrain Vissa, a guide for anchoresses written in the early 13th century, describes the daily routine in detail that borders on the obsessive, and I mean that as a compliment. When to pray, when to eat, when to sleep, how to arrange the cell, what to wear, how to sit. A manual for the most controlled, predictable environment medieval technology could produce. By the 15th century, the anchoritic life had become so popular among women that there were twice as many female anchorites as male ones. Historians still argue whether this gender imbalance reflects genuine preference, lack of other options for women seeking autonomy, or some combination that resists simple explanation. The answer is almost certainly complicated. What is clear is that anchoritic enclosure offered something almost nothing else in medieval society offered women: solitude, silence, and total control over their own environment. Julian used hers to think. With the systematic intensity of a mind that could not be satisfied with easy answers, she thought about the nature of divine love. Her revelations of divine love begins with 16 visions, or showings, that she experienced during a severe illness when she was about 30 years old. She nearly died. She saw Christ's blood flowing, the Virgin Mary as a young girl, and the entire cosmos held in God's hand like something small and round and fragile. She wrote, "In this he showed me a little thing, the quantity of a hazelnut lying in the palm of my hand, the whole of creation the size of a hazelnut." It is one of the most famous images in English mysticism, and it was produced by a woman sitting in a stone box the size of a generous closet. What followed the visions was not a quick transcription. It was 20 years of thinking, turning the visions over, analysing them, questioning them, building a systematic theology around them. The long text of the Revelations is not a diary of mystical experience. It is a philosophical treatise that argues, reasons, considers objections, and wrestles with the problem of evil. It rivals anything produced by the great university theologians of her era, all of whom had libraries and colleagues and lecture halls, none of which Julian had. She had 3 windows and a hazelnut and a mind that would not stop working. Her most famous line sounds, out of context like a medieval greeting card: "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." In context, the conclusion of the most rigorous argument for divine benevolence ever constructed. It was produced by a woman who had watched the Black Death kill half of Norwich and who had nearly died herself. A woman who had voluntarily walled herself into a room for the rest of her life, and who, after 20 years of relentless thought, concluded that love was the fundamental structure of reality. It is not naivete. It is the hardest won optimism in English literature, from a stone cell, from a woman whose name we do not know for certain, and it endures. You press your face to the exterior window, the one where visitors came for counsel, and inside the cell is small and clean and very still. There is a crucifix. There is a cat. The Ancrain Vissa specifically permits anchoresses to keep a cat, which is, when you think about it, the most perfectly medieval permission imaginable. There is a desk, and on the desk pages covered in careful handwriting. And there is silence. Deep, stone-walled, absolute silence. The kind some minds find, at last, like home. You close the window, gently because Julian is working, and step back into the street, and the street hits you like a wall of sound and smell and chaos. Norwich in the 14th century is alive in the way only medieval cities are alive, aggressively and with insufficient drainage. But we are not staying. We are leaving for the countryside. We have spent a long time with extraordinary ones. Thomas Aquinas, possibly the greatest theologian who ever lived. Hildegard of Bingen, possibly the most talented polymath of her century. Brother Juniper, possibly the most memorable fool in Franciscan history. Julian of Norwich, who wrote the most profound work of English mysticism from inside a room the size of a parking space. These are remarkable people, and their stories are worth telling. But they are by definition exceptional. They made it into the historical record because they were exceptional. The historical record is a spotlight, not a floodlight. It illuminates the extraordinary and leaves the ordinary in shadow, so let us walk into the shadow. Let us walk down a muddy dirt road past hedgerows older than memory, past fields where strips of the open field system run in long parallel lines like a medieval barcode. We walk into a village. It has no name anyone will write down for another 200 years. About 40 houses, a church, a green, and a pond with ducks. You stand on the green and look around, and what you see is a community operating on principles so different from modern life that you almost need a translation guide. There is no anonymity here. Everyone knows everyone and has since birth. Everyone's grandparents knew everyone else's grandparents, and their grandparents before them. The village is a web of relationships so dense and so old, it is less a community than a single organism with 40 houses and a pond with ducks. And within this organism, people have roles. Not jobs exactly, not in the way we think of jobs. You are the blacksmith because your father was the blacksmith. You are the miller because someone built a mill and your family has been running it ever since. You are the reeve, the hayward, the alewife, the shepherd. The role comes with the life. It is not chosen so much as inherited, like eye colour or a tendency toward melancholy. Here is the question that matters. Within this system, what happens to someone who is different? Not dramatically different, just quietly and persistently different. Someone who does not follow conversations easily. Someone who prefers to be alone. Someone with an extraordinary memory for certain things and an extraordinary inability to remember other things. Someone who finds the market day overwhelming. Someone who does a single task with remarkable skill and focus, but cannot manage the small talk that lubricates daily village life. The answer, which might surprise you, is they probably did okay. Not all of them, not always, but more of them, more often than you might think. Consider the shepherd. The medieval shepherd's job was to take the village's sheep to pasture in the morning, watch them all day and bring them back at evening. That is it. That is the whole job. You're alone on a hillside with animals for 10 to 12 hours a day, social demands minimal, sensory environment controlled. Wind, grass, sky, sheep. The routine is absolute. The same hills, the same paths, the same animals, season after season, year upon year, without change or surprise. For someone who finds human interaction exhausting and animal soothing, who thrives on routine, a shepherd's life is not a hardship. It is a vocation. Consider the woodcutter, deep in the forest, alone, with physical work that has a clear and immediate result. You swing the axe, the wood splits, there is no ambiguity, no subtext. The tree does not require eye contact or laugh at your jokes. The forest does not care if you're awkward at feasts. The work is rhythmic, repetitive, and deeply satisfying. Consider the herbalist, the village healer who knows every plant within a 5-mile radius, not casually, but with exhaustive, encyclopedic, borderline obsessive precision that goes far beyond professional necessity. This person can tell you that this leaf is good for fever, that root for toothache, and this berry will kill you, but only if you eat more than 6 before midsummer. This is specialised knowledge held with a passion that looks very much like what we would now call a special interest. Obsessive, exhaustive, and deeply personal. And in a medieval village, this knowledge is not a quirk. It is a survival resource. You are the person who keeps everyone alive. You are not weird. You are the person who keeps everyone alive when the physician is 3 days' ride away and charges more than anyone can afford. Historians still argue whether medieval village communities were genuinely more tolerant of cognitive difference than modern societies, or whether we are romanticising a past as cruel as any human society has ever been. The evidence is mixed. Court records and manor rolls refer to people described as natural fools or innocents, people recognised as cognitively different and often exempted from certain legal obligations. The 13th century legal text known as Bracton explicitly distinguishes between the natural fool, someone born different, and the lunatic, someone who became different through illness. Bracton assigns different legal protections to each category, creating a framework for recognising and accommodating cognitive difference, however crude by modern standards. There was, in other words, a legal framework for recognising and accommodating cognitive difference, however crude and incomplete it was by modern standards. But there were also darker threads. The changeling belief, the idea that fairies had stolen a normal child and left a strange one, is found throughout medieval folklore. It does not take much imagination to see how this belief could apply to a child who did not develop typically, who did not speak or engage socially. The changeling story is, in one reading, a way of processing the grief and confusion of having a child who is different. In another reading, it is a justification for abuse. Because if the child in the cradle is not really your child, if it is a fairy substitute, a thing, then the normal rules of care and protection do not apply. The truth, as usual, is that the medieval village was not one thing. It was not a paradise of neurodivergent acceptance, and it was not a hell of conformist brutality. It was a human community with all the complexity that implies. Some different people were cherished, some were tolerated, some were exploited, some were harmed. The outcomes depended on 1,000 variables. The specific community, the individual, the difference, the economic conditions, the local priest's theology, the family's resources, the neighbours' temperaments, and plain irreducible luck. But the medieval village had something structurally that the modern world has largely lost, and it is worth naming because it matters. It had roles that did not require social fluency. It had work that was solitary, repetitive, and skilled. It had a community structure stable enough to accommodate its members' differences. It had a pace of life that was, by our standards, glacially slow, and within that slowness there was room. Room to be quiet, room to be odd, room to know every herb in the forest and nothing about how to make small talk at a feast. room to be the shepherd on the hill, watching the light change, counting sheep, and finding in that count not boredom but something very close to peace. You sit on the village green as the sun begins to set. The ducks are settling on the pond. Somewhere a blacksmith banks his forge, and the rhythm of that hammer has been the heartbeat of this village for longer than anyone remembers. The shepherd is bringing the flock home down the lane, and you can hear the bells on the lead-ewe, soft and steady, a sound unchanged in 1,000 years. Tomorrow it will all happen again, the same roads, the same fields, the same sky, and for some minds that sameness is not a prison. It is the only ground that holds. So you have been wandering through this medieval village, watching all these people who would probably get a diagnosis today just living their lives. The quiet weaver who never looks anyone in the eye but produces cloth so fine that merchants travel 3 counties to buy it. The shepherd who talks to rocks but knows every lamb by its specific bleat. The old woman who arranges her herbs in patterns no one else understands, but who has never once mixed up a remedy in all her years of practice. They all have places here in this village. They all belong to something larger than themselves. But now you need to leave the village for a while because something is happening in the halls of power that is going to affect every single one of these